next guest thinks that the proposed stimulus package is, in his words, like giving booze to alcoholics. Jonathan Williams, the Director of Tax and Fiscal Policy for the American Legislative Exchange Council, joins us now. You think that the states have had a little too much of the fun stuff and they need to cut back a little bit on their drinking/spending?
Well, absolutely. That's exactly the case. Over the last 10 years, states have really spent like drunken sailors on a 48-hour furlough, and in a lot of cases, it's just not sustainable. And, you know, state spending in the last 10 years is up 125%, while state debt is up 95%. And so states are clearly spending beyond their means, and now they're coming and beating a path to Washington asking for a federal handout. The problem is we've tried a bailout of the states in 2003, and when the federal government gave the states $20 billion, and that was seen as an effort to stop state tax increases. Well, in fact, it didn't work. The next year, 35 states had to increase taxes, and of course now the proposed bailout of the states is larger, and the problem is that it doesn't address the fundamental question of state overspending.
Yeah, they've got some problems in some states, though, as I'm sure you're aware of, where it's not just a matter of you or me or anybody else being able to cut back on a little bit of your spending. They have constitutional requirements for increases in some spending programs, regardless of what the revenues are doing at the state treasury. So they got to, I mean, this is more complicated than just, say, cut spending.
No, absolutely, you're right. I think a lot of times we've seen these requirements in the states that have mandated and have taken a lot of the spending off the books, which I think is a very dangerous thing to do, where, for instance, in Colorado, the mandated education spending would increase every year regardless of the overall size of the budget, which really puts a crimp on some very important areas of the budget. So I think that it's a huge issue that states are going to have to deal with.
Jonathan, are we going to just see a bunch of bridges to nowhere with this stimulus money? Are we making just a huge mistake here with this plan?
Well, I think so. I think that, you know, you take a look at the package, and, you know, I think it's pretty hard to argue that, you know, a couple $100 million for contraceptives is going to really stimulate the economy.
Well, or, you know what, Jonathan, that's been taken out, but just real quick, that did get taken out
it did.
Today.
I saw that, of course.
But, Dustin, I mean, this is a fair argument,
absolutely.
Though. And if we're talking about the state levels, when they start spending money at the state level, and it's like they just
look what we did.
wasteful.
We've given so far $350 billion to the banks with no oversight. There were regulations. Well, how are you going to get it? But no regulations on how you're going to spend it, unless we have some conditions. How you're going to spend it, where is this money going? It seems pointless to give them and say, do whatever you want with it. We already know what they're going to do.
Build a bridge to nowhere.
Exactly.
They don't know where to spend it. That's the problem. And the question that I have, Matt, is this question about, is this going to work?
I don't think it's going to work, and Jonathan made a great point. 2003, it didn't work, and I don't think it's going to work in the future. But the question is, what is the alternative? If we do not give California money, what happens to California? If California falls apart, it's going to affect the nation. So we have to do something. I don't know what the answer is, though.
Hey, guys, real quick, I want to explain to our viewers what they're seeing next to Matt's pretty face there and now next to me, which isn't so pretty. But we're looking at live pictures in Washington. President Barack Obama has left the White House on his way to the Capitol. He has got to convince House Republicans and Senate Republicans to get on board with this stimulus plan, to vote it through. And this is, remember, this is the first big event of his presidency and something he's been talking about for a long time on the campaign trail. And now, of course, now that he is the president of the United States, this is a picture, a live picture of the Capitol. I believe that's the motorcade, unless I'm mistaken. That is the presidential motorcade arriving at the Capitol. Certainly going to be some interesting. We said he's going into the Lion's Den there with House and Senate Republicans. You certainly can argue that. Just a kind of a cold den there in Washington, D.C. today. Real quick, we're going to leave these pictures up and kind of let our viewers watch this. But, Jonathan, as we watch President Obama arrive here at the Capitol, that is an interesting issue. Maybe you can address this, maybe you can't. But he does have opposition from Republicans on both sides here because they feel that there's a lot of pork barrel politics and spending being thrown at this. And it looks like you're saying kind of the same thing, that there's not going to be any oversight of some of this infrastructure spending.
You know, I'm really worried about that. And, you know, as much as I enjoy going down to the National Mall and playing softball every summer here in Washington, $200 million for new grass at the Jefferson Memorial seems a little bit over the top. I think we're going to see a lot of programs like that. And, you know, I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. And we will see more bridges to nowhere. And we will see a lot of ridiculous spending programs. And, hey, let's look at it. You know, just because you say something is a stimulus doesn't mean that it is. It's not going to stimulate the economy. If you ask Barack Obama's Council on Economic Advisors chair, Christina Romer, who has done much work on this, to what ends recessions, her conclusion is that tax relief and monetary policy end recessions, not government spending.
And you go back, Matt, to what you were talking about. If California goes bust, for well, what will happen? There's a large number of people out there that say, okay, go bankrupt.
Let them go bankrupt. Yeah.
To Matt's point, we had this same sort of panic-stricken mode going on when TARP was approved. And I hope that the same thing doesn't affect the decision-making now. Something's got to be done. Something's got to be done. Do it now, regardless of the consequences. I think that's what happened with TARP. The impression was if we don't do something right away, the whole financial system will collapse. And I don't think that was the case. Is it the case that if we don't give these states money right away, they're going to go bankrupt?
Dustin, real quick, just want to let our viewers know, here comes President Barack Obama. He has arrived at the Capitol. This is an interior shot within the hallways of the Capitol. President Barack Obama, we don't expect, and he's not making a statement, but you never know with this president. We're just getting as used to him as he's getting used to us in these first few days of his presidency. But he is going to be, once again, meeting with House and Senate Republicans over the next couple of hours. Later on this afternoon, we do expect to hear some statements from GOP leaders to let us know kind of what their impressions of the meetings were, and if the president does, in fact, convince them that this stimulus plan does need to be passed, as is, again, $825 billion. Dunstan, I cut you off. Please continue.
But it's also,
never mind.
But it's also very interesting. It's interesting that the president is going to Capitol Hill as opposed to having them come to the White House. And secondly, is I'm not quite sure of all the motivations. Maybe, Jonathan, you can chime in here. He doesn't need the Republicans. The Republicans don't count when it comes to the votes on these measures. So why is he doing this?
You know, I think he wants he probably wants 80 votes in the Senate and a large majority in the House to give him more of a clear mandate that this is a bipartisan issue. And, you know, quite frankly, I think Republicans ought to be leery of this. I mean, if you look at the state-federal hybrid issue here, the federal government is in worse shape than most of the states today. You look at the Congressional Budget Office projections, and, you know, we have a $1.2 trillion deficit this year with $10 trillion in federal debt. And so for the federal government to be bailing out the states, you know, when they're in worse position themselves doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And, you know, you take a look at the number, $825 billion in this stimulus package, and even Barack Obama's numbers of 4 million jobs to be created, you know, that costs taxpayers over $200,000 per job that the president said he's going to create with this package. That's just, you can't do that in these economic times today.
Jonathan, we're going to leave it there, but Jonathan Williams, certainly very interesting research, and your opinion has been very interesting. Thank you for being with us, sir.
Nice, Jonathan.
Great to talk to you.
Thanks for having me.